The alien ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, and its sensors immediately began scanning the third planet from the sun. Navigator Crick studied the readings with growing satisfaction because this world called Earth looked perfect for conquest. The planet had about 8 billion inhabitants who were still using primitive technology, and their weapons were laughably outdated compared to Valorian standards. Supreme Commander Thax stood beside him examining the data, and his expression showed nothing but contempt for these humans. He had conquered 43 different species in his 70 years of military service, and this one appeared to be the easiest target yet. The humans still relied on chemical rockets to reach space, and their orbital stations were completely unarmed civilian platforms. Their military forces used combustion engines and kinetic weapons that belonged in a museum. Thax clicked his mandibles in amusement as he reviewed the scans. Sub-Commander Vell entered the bridge and studied the tactical display with more caution than her superior officer. She noticed that the humans had an unusually high number of nuclear weapons scattered across their planet, and their deterrent strategy seemed built around mutual destruction. Something about that bothered her, but Thax dismissed her concerns immediately. Nuclear weapons were primitive toys compared to plasma lance technology, and Valorian shields could absorb anything these humans might launch. He ordered the fleet to prepare for standard subjugation protocol, and 300 warships began assembling near Jupiter. The fleet included everything from small corvettes to massive dreadnoughts that measured 2 kilometers in length. Each ship carried enough firepower to level a city, and their combined strength could sterilize an entire planet. Thax felt absolutely confident that the humans would surrender the moment they saw the fleet. Deep inside Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, alarms began screaming across every console. Admiral Marcus Knight ran into the command center, where dozens of analysts worked frantically at their stations. He demanded a report, and Commander Lisa pulled up telescope imagery showing an impossible gravitational signature at the edge of the solar system. The signature appeared suddenly and violated every known law of physics. It matched theoretical predictions for faster-than-light propulsion, which meant only one thing. First contact had finally happened, and it was not peaceful. Marcus felt his stomach clench because he had spent 20 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Politicians had called him paranoid and dismissed his warnings as science fiction. Now the nightmare had become reality, and Earth had only hours to prepare. Marcus activated Protocol Nightfall, which was the emergency response plan for alien invasion. He ordered all defense installations worldwide to go to maximum alert and told someone to wake up Dr. Helen Carter immediately. The president needed to be contacted on a secure line, and every military force on the planet needed to know what was coming. Dr. Carter received the emergency call at 3 a.m, and her mind snapped to full alertness despite the hour. She had spent 15 years developing secret defensive weapons that were considered too dangerous to reveal, until absolutely necessary. That moment had apparently arrived, so she told them she would reach the facility in 30 minutes. She ordered the quantum network initialized and the graviton array charged to full power. If aliens were coming, then Earth needed to be ready to fight. The Valorian fleet maintained position near Jupiter, while they monitored human communications and watched panic spread across the planet. Battle Coordinator Thren analyzed human military movements with professional interest and reported that primitive aircraft were being scrambled while naval vessels moved to defensive positions. Thax told him to let them scramble because it would make no difference. He ordered a standard ultimatum broadcast in all major human languages. The message would give these humans one full rotation of their planet to surrender unconditionally or face orbital bombardment of their military installations. The message reached Earth simultaneously on every screen and communication device in 70 different languages. The voice was translated but unmistakably inhuman, and it declared that Earth now belonged to the Valorian Empire. Humans were ordered to surrender their weapons and prepare for integration into the Imperial economic and military structure. Resistance would result in annihilation, and they had 24 hours to comply. Marcus watched world leaders appear on secure video feeds, and their faces showed pure terror and confusion. The president looked directly at him and asked if the Quantum Defense Initiative had actually produced anything useful, or if it was just a massive waste of money. Marcus glanced at Helen, who had just arrived and was reviewing system readouts. She gave him a subtle nod that meant everything was ready. Marcus told the president he could not promise victory, but he could promise the aliens would regret coming here. Helen stepped forward and reported that all quantum entanglement nodes were synchronized, and graviton field generators were at 97% charge. The Excalibur satellites were armed and locked onto the fleet position. The pilots were standing by and the railgun network was operational with 48 tungsten penetrators positioned and targeted. She paused before mentioning the Prometheus option, which made the room fall. Completely silent. The Prometheus device was humanity's most closely guarded secret and represented both their greatest achievement and darkest fear. It was a weapon so powerful it could shatter a moon, and it operated on principles of quantum mechanics that seemed to violate conservation of energy. Marcus said he hoped it would not come to that, but ordered it prepared anyway. He told Lisa to deploy Lieutenant Jake Morrison's squadron to orbital position, because if they were going to send a message, it needed to be crystal clear. Jake sat in the cockpit of his experimental fighter craft running final system checks. Around him, 11 other pilots did the same, and their aircraft represented the bleeding edge of human aerospace engineering. Unlike conventional fighters, these craft used experimental propulsion systems and weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Lisa's voice came through his helmet speakers, authorizing them to engage on Admiral Knight's order. She reminded them to remember their training and make every shot count. As the deadline approached, Thax watched with satisfaction as human military forces massed uselessly on the surface below. He had given orders to begin bombardment precisely on schedule, starting with military installations in North America. Vel reported unusual energy signatures from the orbital infrastructure, but Thax dismissed this as desperation. He ordered the fleet to move into bombardment position and target command centers and weapon stockpiles. The Valorian fleet began descending toward Earth orbit with weapons charging and shields at maximum power. 300 warships that had conquered dozens of worlds carried enough firepower to destroy everything humans had built. They had absolutely no idea they were about to encounter something no species in the galaxy had ever created before. Weaponized quantum mechanics combined with human desperation and 8,000 years of experience perfecting the art of killing. Marcus watched the alien fleet approach and his hand hovered over the engagement authorization control. He took one deep breath and gave the order that would change galactic history forever. Navigator Crick suddenly saw his console erupt with warning signals, and he shouted that multiple energy spikes were appearing across the planetary orbital band. Gravitational distortions were forming directly in their approach vector, but Thax barely glanced at the readings and told him to maintain formation. He insisted that human weapons could not penetrate Valorian shields no matter what tricks they tried. The Excalibur satellites activated simultaneously, and 48 platforms that had been hidden among orbital debris suddenly came online. These satellites had been positioned carefully over the past decade and disguised as decommissioned communication equipment and space junk. Dr. Carter's voice echoed through the defense network as she announced that graviton field generators were at full power and spatial compression was initiating in the target zone. From the Valorian perspective, space itself seemed to twist and bend in impossible ways. The lead formation of 20 vessels suddenly found the distance between them shrinking without any logical explanation. Ships that were maintaining safe separation distances were now colliding with each other, and their navigational systems screamed contradictory readings that made no sense. Vel shouted for evasive maneuvers, but it was already far too late to avoid the disaster unfolding before them. The railgun platforms fired in perfect synchronized sequence and tungsten penetrators weighing 10 tons each streaked across the void. These projectiles had been accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed using electromagnetic force. The Valorian shields were designed to deflect energy weapons and small projectiles, but they were completely unprepared for kinetic impactors, traveling at relativistic velocities. The first 3 dreadnoughts simply ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. The penetrators punched through their shields as if they were made of paper, and continued through armor plating and deep into the ships themselves. The kinetic energy created catastrophic hydrostatic shocks that tore the massive vessels apart from the inside out. Debris exploded outward in glittering clouds of shattered metal and frozen atmosphere that sparkled in the sunlight. Battle Coordinator Thren stared at his displays in complete disbelief, because these were supposed to be primitive kinetic weapons. They should not have this velocity or this devastating power. Crix reported frantically that the humans had mastered magnetic acceleration far beyond their initial projections. These were not chemical rockets, but electromagnetic mass drivers operating at 92% of theoretical maximum efficiency. 5 more. Valorian ships exploded as the railguns continued their calculated firing sequence, and each shot was perfectly aimed with compensation for orbital mechanics and relativistic effects. The quantum computers controlling the weapons made Valorian tactical systems look like primitive counting devices. Thax finally realized his terrible mistake and roared orders to return fire. All ships were commanded to engage defensive positions and target those orbital platforms immediately. The Valorian plasma lances activated and brilliant streams of superheated matter lanced toward the Excalibur satellites. Several platforms were struck and vaporized in flashes of light, but the damage to the fleet was already catastrophic. The careful tactical arrangement was completely destroyed and ships were scattered across 1,000 kilometers of space in total chaos. Lieutenant Jake Morrison and his squadron chose that exact moment to enter the battle. The 12 fighters dropped from high orbit at impossible angles, and their quantum thrusters left trails of distorted space in their wake. Unlike conventional spacecraft, these fighters did not obey traditional orbital mechanics at all. They could change direction without visible thrust and accelerate without apparent reaction mass. They moved in ways that should violate conservation of momentum, but somehow did not. Jake announced calmly that weapons were hot despite his heart hammering in his chest. He ordered the squadron to engage targets of opportunity and break into pairs. His targeting computer locked onto a Valorian corvette, and he triggered his plasma interceptors without hesitation. The weapons were not as powerful as the enemy plasma lances, but they were faster and far more maneuverable. Twin bolts of contained plasma struck the corvette's engine section, and the ship's fusion reactor went critical immediately. Another expanding ball of debris joined the growing cloud of wreckage. The Valorian fighter craft launched in response, and sleek vessels armed with hunter-seeker missiles and pulse cannons streaked toward the human fighters. But these pilots had been trained to fight enemies who followed predictable physics, and the human craft danced through their attack patterns effortlessly. The quantum drives allowed instantaneous vector changes that would turn a normal pilot into paste, but inertial dampening fields protected the human crews. One of Jake's wingmen called out that the enemy was adapting to their tactics and switching to swarm formations. Jake responded by activating the jamming package, and every fighter simultaneously began broadcasting quantum noise. Dr. Carter's team had discovered this phenomenon by accident during weapons research and found it created false probability states that confused any system relying on quantum computing. The Valorian hunter-seeker missiles suddenly lost their target locks and began spiraling off into empty space or colliding with each other in spectacular explosions. Their fighter craft found their weapon systems calculating impossible firing solutions that made no mathematical sense. Chaos multiplied chaos as the Valorian formation completely fell apart. Sub-Commander Vel desperately tried to restore order and commanded all ships to fall back to defensive perimeter Delta. They needed to reform their battle line and re-establish shield coordination. Thax snarled that they would do no such thing because they outnumbered the humans 300 to 12. He ordered them to press the attack and show these primitives the true might of the Empire. But the numbers were already changing rapidly, and not in favor of the Valorians. The orbital battle had been raging for less than 4 minutes, and the Valorian fleet had already lost 37 ships. The humans had lost 9 railgun platforms and only 1 fighter. Colonel Frank Bishop watched the battle from ground command and reported that the alien fleet was attempting to break into lower orbital zones. They were trying to get below the satellite network, where the railguns could not track them effectively. Marcus responded grimly that they should let them come, because the second surprise was waiting down there. As Valorian ships descended toward lower orbit, they entered the range of Earth's directed energy weapons. Dozens of installations across the planet activated simultaneously, and massive laser arrays that had been masquerading as astronomical observatories began firing. The lasers were not powerful enough to destroy alien ships outright, but they did not need to be. They were designed to blind sensors and fry external communications arrays and create thermal stress on armor plating. Combined with the ongoing chaos from railguns and fighter craft, they added another devastating layer of confusion. Crix's console now displayed more error messages than valid data, and he reported that they had lost contact with 48 vessels. Hull breaches were reported across 70% of the remaining fleet, and the human attack patterns suggested quantum-entangled communications. Thren insisted this was impossible because quantum entanglement could not transmit information as it violated causality. Vel said bitterly to tell that to the humans who were clearly doing it anyway. She watched another dreadnought break apart under repeated railgun impacts and told Thax they must withdraw immediately. This engagement was completely lost, and continuing would only result in total annihilation. Thax refused to accept reality because in 70 years of service he had never retreated from a lesser species. He ordered all remaining dreadnoughts to focus fire on the satellite network and destroy the weapon platforms. If they eliminated the railguns, they could still regain the advantage. The surviving Valorian capital ships began coordinating their plasma lance fire and pouring concentrated energy into the orbital band. More Excalibur satellites were destroyed as their protective fields were overwhelmed by focused bombardment. For a brief moment, it seemed the tide might actually turn in favor of the invaders. Then Dr. Carter gave the order that changed everything forever. She reported to Marcus that the Prometheus device was armed and ready for deployment, with target coordinates locked on the enemy flagship. Marcus hesitated for only 1 second because the Prometheus weapon had never been tested at full power. Its theoretical yield was beyond measurement, and its mechanism was barely understood even by the scientists who created it. But if they were going to send a clear message to the entire galaxy, it needed to be absolutely unmistakable. He gave authorization code Knight 77 Alpha and quietly said, "God help us all." From Earth's surface, a single missile launched into space. It was small compared to the railgun penetrators and sleek and black and nearly invisible against the void. The Valorian sensors barely registered it as a threat as it accelerated toward their flagship. Crix reported an incoming projectile with minimal energy signature and assessed it as likely a desperate last resort weapon. Thax ordered it destroyed without concern, and point defense systems activated immediately. Streams of interceptor rounds fired at the approaching missile and several scored DI. 72 hours after the battle, Admiral Marcus Knight stood before a joint session of the United Nations Security Council, and the chamber was packed with representatives who 3 days ago were skeptical that intelligent alien life even existed. Now they demanded answers about weapons they never knew humanity possessed, and Marcus adjusted his uniform before meeting the camera directly. The Secretary General asked how long Earth had possessed these advanced weapons, and why world governments were not informed about any of it. Marcus explained that the Quantum Defense Initiative was established 23 years ago, after deep space telescopes detected anomalous signals consistent with artificial origin. They could not prove intelligent alien life existed, but they could not afford to be unprepared if first contact turned hostile. The Chinese representative interrupted and asked where the funding came from because the costs must have been astronomical. Marcus revealed that a coalition of nations contributed secretly through various scientific research programs, including the United States and European Union and Russia and China and Japan and India and 12 other nations. They diverted approximately 2% of global military spending and publicly attributed it to space exploration and theoretical physics research. Dr. Helen Carter stepped forward to join him and explained that what they discovered during research changed everything. They found that certain quantum mechanical principles, when applied at macro scales, could create effects that appeared to violate conservation laws. The graviton field generators did not actually break physics but exploited loopholes in how space and time interact at quantum scales. The Brazilian representative asked about the Prometheus weapon with barely controlled fear in her voice. She wanted to know why humanity created something that destroys matter at the atomic level. Helen's expression became grave as she explained that the Prometheus device was a weapon of absolute last resort. Its theoretical yield was nearly unlimited, and it was also unstable and dangerous to store. It represented the most dangerous technology humanity had ever created, and they had 7 more in secure storage. She strongly recommended they remain there, hopefully forever. Commander Lisa displayed holographic images of debris recovered from the Valorian ships, and explained that initial analysis showed their materials science was centuries ahead of human technology in some areas. Their energy storage and metamaterial construction was particularly advanced, but their computing technology relied heavily on quantum principles that humans had learned to disrupt. Colonel Frank Bishop added that Valorian military doctrine appeared to assume overwhelming technological superiority in every engagement. They had no contingency plans for encountering equivalent or superior weapons technology. When their initial assault failed, they panicked rather than adapted to the changing battlefield conditions. The Russian representative asked the question everyone wanted answered, and he asked it bluntly. Could the aliens come back, and would they come back? Marcus exchanged glances with his team before answering honestly. Yes to both questions without any doubt. The Valorian Empire, based on intercepted communications, controlled hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. Earth had defeated one fleet, but they likely had thousands of ships in total. Humanity had now marked themselves as either a serious threat or a prize worth claiming at any cost. The chamber erupted in worried conversation, and the Secretary General called for order before addressing Marcus again. He asked what Marcus recommended as their next course of action. Marcus answered with one word, and that word was unity. For the first time in human history, they faced an external threat that made their internal conflicts completely irrelevant. He recommended immediate formation of a unified Earth defense force combining military resources from all nations. They needed to expand orbital defenses and build more advanced fighters and establish permanent bases on the Moon and Mars. They had maybe 5 to 10 years before the Empire responded with a larger force. They needed to use that time as wisely as possible. In orbit, Lieutenant Jake Morrison was part of a recovery team examining wreckage of a Valorian corvette. The ship's hull was breached in multiple places, but significant sections remained intact, including what appeared to be the bridge. Jake reported that they found bodies and at least 6 alien casualties in the command section. He paused while studying the remains because they were not what he expected at all. They had 3-fingered hands and exoskeletal features, but bilateral symmetry just like humans. They were bipedal, and if you saw one from a distance, you might mistake it for someone wearing unusual armor. Control acknowledged and told him xenobiology teams were standing by and ordered him to secure the remains for analysis. Jake floated through the shattered bridge, and his suit lights illuminated alien text on the walls and floating data tablets. Everything was scaled slightly larger than human proportions, but not dramatically different. He picked up what appeared to be a personal data device with its screen cracked, but still faintly glowing with alien script. He muttered to himself that they were not so different from humans after all. They came here expecting an easy fight, and instead they found hell. His radio suddenly crackled with an urgent warning that they were detecting a power spike in the Corvette's reactor section. Control ordered him to get out immediately without any delay. Jake did not hesitate even for a second and kicked off from the wall. He propelled himself toward the exit breach as emergency lights began flashing throughout the dead ship. He cleared the hull just as the reactor went critical and released a burst of electromagnetic energy that fried every electronic system in his suit. For several terrifying seconds, Jake tumbled through space in a completely dead suit, unable to communicate or control his momentum in any way. Then a recovery shuttle swooped in, and its mechanical arm caught him gently and pulled him toward the airlock. A calm voice came through once his suit was connected to the shuttle's systems and told him that next time he should let the remote drones do the dangerous boarding operations. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Subcommander Vel stood before the Valorian High Council on their homeworld. Her body language conveyed the shame and horror of what she had witnessed during the battle. The council chamber was a massive dome where 7 elder Valorians sat in judgment of her report. The first counselor spoke with clear disbelief in his voice. He asked if she really expected them to believe that 300 warships of the Imperial fleet were destroyed by a primitive species. She was claiming that Supreme Commander Thax and 17,000 warriors were dead. Fel replied that she did not expect them to believe it, but she demanded that they believe it anyway. She had watched it happen with her own eyes, and these humans had technology that violated their understanding of physics. They had weapons that turned matter into energy with 100% efficiency. They coordinated their forces using instantaneous communication that should be theoretically impossible. The third counselor declared that these humans must be destroyed immediately before they could spread their dangerous technology. Vel surprised the entire assembly by disagreeing strongly with that assessment. She argued that they should quarantine the human system instead and mark it as forbidden territory. These humans were dangerous beyond measure, but they also showed remarkable restraint. They could have pursued the retreating ships and destroyed them all. They could have used their Prometheus device multiple times to ensure total annihilation. They chose not to do either of those things. They defended their home and nothing more than that. Navigator Crix, who stood beside her, activated a holographic display showing recorded data from the battle. He told the counselors that he had analyzed every second of the engagement carefully. The human tactics were purely defensive and not aggressive in nature. Every shot and every maneuver was calculated to destroy military targets while avoiding unnecessary casualties. When the Valorian fleet fled, the humans did not pursue at all. These were not conquerors looking to expand their territory. These were defenders protecting their home. The second counselor examined the data closely and asked how a species that achieved spaceflight less than a century ago could develop such advanced weapons so quickly. Vel answered quietly that it was because humans had been perfecting the art of killing each other for their entire existence. Their planet's history was one continuous cycle of warfare and innovation and survival against impossible odds. Every advance in their technology was driven by conflict and competition. They did not see war as a tool of expansion like the Empire did. They saw it as a fundamental part of existence itself. The Valorians thought they were conquering a primitive world, but they were actually invading a death world that breeds warriors. A world where the inhabitants mistake war for normalcy. Battle Coordinator Thren, who survived on one of the fleeing ships, spoke up to support Vel's assessment. He explained that the humans called their world Earth, which in their dominant languages simply meant ground or dirt. They did not even give their homeworld a dramatic or impressive name. That was how practical and straightforward they were about everything. Everything was designed for efficiency and survival above all else. The council chambers fell into uncomfortable silence as the implications sank in deeply. Finally, the fee. 5 years passed since the battle, and Admiral Marcus Knight now wore the insignia of Supreme Commander of the Earth Defense Force as he stood in the observation gallery of Olympus Station. This was humanity's newest military installation in orbit around Mars, and through the transparent windows he watched a squadron of new generation fighters conduct training exercises against drone opponents. 5 years of intense construction had completely transformed humanity's presence in space. The moon now hosted 3 permanent bases with populations totaling nearly 10,000 people. Mars had 2 bases focused on military training and resource extraction from the Red Planet. The asteroid belt contained dozens of automated mining facilities feeding raw materials to orbital construction yards. Throughout the solar system, a network of sensor stations kept constant watch for any approaching vessels. General Frank Bishop, who had been promoted from colonel, joined Marcus at the window and reported that the 15th Squadron just completed their certification runs. That brought Earth's total to 360 operational spacecraft, plus another 100 in various stages of construction. Marcus said flatly that it was not enough because the Valorian fleet they destroyed numbered 300 ships, and from what they had learned, that represented maybe 2% of the Empire's total military capacity. Humanity needed thousands of ships and not just hundreds. Frank explained they were limited by trained pilots and industrial capacity, but Dr. Carter said the new automated factories on the moon would triple their production rate within 18 months. Marcus asked how recruitment was progressing, and Frank reported that every space-capable nation was contributing personnel. They were training 5,000 new pilots annually, plus all the support staff needed. The problem was not finding volunteers because people were eager to defend Earth. The problem was that only about 30% of candidates could handle the neural interface required to pilot the new generation fighters. The advanced spacecraft did not rely on conventional controls anymore. Instead, pilots connected directly to the ship's quantum computing core through neural links, allowing response times measured in milliseconds. It was highly effective but extremely demanding and required cognitive abilities that not everyone naturally possessed. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, who was now a commander and squadron leader, finished his training session and made his way to the debriefing room. His neural implant tingled slightly as it disconnected from his fighter's systems, and this was a sensation he had grown completely accustomed to over 5 years of constant service. His squadron members filed into the room, and they were men and women from a dozen different nations united by their ability to interface with advanced technology. Among them was his wing commander, Captain Amy Foster, who was a former test pilot from Britain. She had the highest kill simulation scores in the entire Defense Force. Jake pulled up the exercise data on the holographic display and told everyone they had good runs today. He praised Amy's perfect intercept timing, but told Danny Cruz that he was still telegraphing his attack vectors too obviously. The simulation drones had predicted his movements 3 times during the exercise. Danny grimaced and said he knew and was working on improving. Amy pointed out that it was better to learn against smart drones than against real enemies. If the Valorians came back, they would have studied human tactics carefully. They would not fall for the same tricks twice. On Earth, Dr. Helen Carter now oversaw the Quantum Research Facility in Nevada, which had become a sprawling complex. This facility was now the center of humanity's technological revolution. The recovered Valorian technology had yielded insights that accelerated human science by decades, though not without serious challenges. Greg Patterson, who was now her senior research assistant, brought her the latest analysis from faster-than-light drive experiments. He told Helen they had confirmed something important. The Valorian technology was not just old but standardized across multiple species. They found traces of at least 4 different manufacturing techniques in the drive components they recovered. Helen studied the data very carefully and realized this suggested a galactic economy. Ships and technology were being traded or shared among multiple civilizations out there. That implied a level of cooperation or at least commerce between different species. Humanity needed to understand that structure as soon as possible. Greg continued and said there was something else she needed to know. They detected a signal 3 days ago that was very faint and highly compressed. It was coming from approximately 30 light-years away, and it was definitely not Valorian. The encryption was completely different from anything they had seen before. Helen's pulse quickened as she asked if someone was trying to contact Earth. Greg said maybe they were just picking up normal communications now that they knew what to look for. Either way, it meant there were other species out there watching humanity. Commander Lisa Hayes, who was now Director of Intelligence, confirmed the discovery during her briefing to Marcus and the UN Security Council. They designated the signal source as Contact Alpha, and linguistic analysis suggested the communication was not directed at Earth specifically. It appeared to be a general broadcast like commercial radio that humanity was now capable of detecting. The Secretary General asked if they could decode the message, and Lisa said partially. They had identified what appeared to be mathematical constants and chemical formulas, suggesting scientific or commercial content. If this was civilian communication, it meant there were peaceful species in the galaxy conducting normal trade and research. The French representative countered that it could be propaganda, and they could not assume benign intent just because the signal seemed mundane. Marcus interjected that this was exactly why they continued building defenses, while also pursuing diplomatic options. He ordered Lisa to prepare a response package with basic mathematics and universal physical constants. The message should indicate that humanity was aware of the galactic community and interested in peaceful contact. But it must also make clear that Earth was capable of defending itself. The decision to broadcast humanity's first intentional interstellar message sparked intense debate across the entire planet. Some people feared that drawing attention to Earth would invite more invasions from hostile species. Others argued that hiding was pointless since the Valorians already knew exactly where humanity was located. In the end, the message was sent as a carefully crafted series of mathematical proofs and symbolic representations of human civilization. It was transmitted toward the Contact Alpha source, using quantum-entangled communications that theoretically traveled faster than light. The response arrived just 3 weeks later, and Lisa was woken at 2 a.m. by emergency alerts. She rushed to the communications center to find her staff staring at displays showing complex patterns of data. They reported receiving replies to the broadcast and not just from Contact Alpha. Multiple sources were responding with at least 7 distinct signal origins, all within 100 light-years of Earth. The translated messages varied in content and tone, but several key points emerged clearly. The Valorian Empire was considered an aggressive expansionist power by many galactic civilizations. They were tolerated because they maintained trade networks and generally followed certain rules of engagement. Humanity's decisive defeat of their fleet had caused significant political ripples, and multiple species were now curious about human technology and defensive capabilities. One message originating from a species calling themselves the Viridian Collective was particularly intriguing to the analysts. It contained mathematical proofs of faster-than-light travel and detailed star charts and an invitation to open diplomatic channels. The Viridians appeared to be a commercial and scientific civilization with no military ambitions. They were interested in humanity as potential trading partners. Another message from the Zerthian Assembly was more cautious in tone. They acknowledged humanity's technological prowess but warned that the galaxy contained threats far more dangerous than the Valorian Empire. They referenced something called the Outer Territories with clear tones of warning, though the details remained unclear. Dr. Carter analyzed all incoming communications in her laboratory, working with linguists and cultural anthropologists. They needed to decode not just the literal meanings but the implied contexts and cultural assumptions. She explained to her team that humanity was being evaluated by these species. They were trying to figure out where Earth fit in the galactic power structure. Were humans potential allies or trading partners or threats to be contained? Greg asked what she thought humanity really was. Helen paused and considered the question carefully. She thought humans were wildcards in galactic politics. They did not fit the expected pattern of new spacefaring species at all. Most civilizations apparently developed faster than light travel before quantum weapons. Humanity did it completely backward. They had weapons that scared established powers but were still stuck in their own solar system. That made Earth unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. General Frank Bishop coordinated with military planners to assess the implications of potential contact with peaceful alien species. If they established trade relations, they could acquire faster than LIG. The UES Horizon launched from Olympus Station at exactly 0600 hours, accompanied by 12 advanced fighters in tight formation. The ship's faster-than-light drive activated and created a bubble of distorted space-time around all the vessels. For the crew, the sensation was completely indescribable, like falling and flying simultaneously, while the stars outside blurred into impossible colors. 4 hours later, they dropped back into normal space near the designated meeting coordinates. There, waiting in the darkness of space, was the Viridian delegation, and their vessel was beautiful in ways human engineering had never achieved. Organic curves flowed into crystalline structures that pulsed with internal light. It was smaller than the Horizon, but radiated a sense of advanced technology that made even Earth's newest spacecraft seem primitive by comparison. The communications officer reported that contact was established and the Viridians were transmitting a welcome message. The translation software processed the alien language and reported they were inviting humanity to send a shuttle to their vessel for direct negotiations. Marcus, who was monitoring from Olympus Station via quantum link, gave his approval to proceed. He ordered the fighters to maintain defensive formation and told Jake that any sign of trouble meant getting their people out immediately. Jake watched as the diplomatic shuttle detached from the Horizon and made its way toward the alien vessel. His fighter's sensors were at maximum sensitivity, analyzing every energy signature and every quantum fluctuation. But there was no indication of hostile intent anywhere. No weapon systems were activating and no shield. Generators were charging to combat levels. The shuttle docked. With the Viridian vessel and humanity's diplomat stepped aboard an alien ship for the first time in history. Through the video feeds, Marcus and billions of humans watching from Earth saw the interior of the Viridian vessel. They got their first clear view of an alien species that was not trying to kill them. The Viridians were tall at nearly 8 feet with 4 arms and skin that shifted through subtle color patterns. They moved with grace in the microgravity, and their large eyes reflected genuine curiosity as they examined the human delegation. The lead Viridian diplomat communicated through a translation device, and its voice was surprisingly pleasant. It welcomed the humans of Earth to the galactic community and said their victory over the Valorian fleet had drawn much attention. They had many questions, but first they wanted to share what they knew of the galaxy humanity had entered. As the diplomatic meetings began inside the alien vessel, Jake maintained his protective vigil outside. He was protecting the most important conversation in human history, and he took that responsibility seriously. Inside the Viridian vessel, humanity was learning about galactic politics and ancient civilizations, and the complex web of alliances and rivalries that spanned thousands of worlds across the galaxy. 2 years passed after first contact with the Viridian Collective, and humanity had established diplomatic and trade relations with several alien species. Earth maintained a strong defensive posture while expanding its reach. The first human colonies beyond the solar system were being planned, and the future looked promising. Then news arrived of a threat that made the Valorian Empire seem minor by comparison. Supreme Commander Marcus Knight reviewed intelligence reports in his office aboard Olympus Station, which had been expanded to 3 times its original size. General Frank Bishop entered with a grave expression and said they received an urgent communication from the Viridian Collective. It was priority 1 and encrypted with their highest security protocols. They were requesting an emergency meeting of something called the Coalition Council. Marcus asked what the Coalition Council was because the Viridians had never mentioned it before. Frank explained that neither had the Zerthians or the Krev or any other species they had been trading with over the past 2 years. Apparently it was a loose alliance of peaceful civilizations that provided mutual defense. They were invoking Article 7 of their charter, which allowed them to petition non-member species for assistance against existential threats. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine and asked who was threatening them. Frank said they would not say over normal channels and wanted a face-to-face meeting with Earth's leadership. They were sending a delegation to Earth itself, which was completely unprecedented. In 2 years of diplomacy, they had always met in neutral territory far from any homeworld. The meeting took place 1 week later in Geneva, in a specially constructed facility designed to accommodate multiple species. The Viridian delegation arrived aboard a small vessel escorted by Commander Jake Morrison's squadron, flying the latest generation fighters. The lead Viridian diplomat, who asked to be called eldest, addressed the assembled Earth representatives. Its color pattern showed visible distress as it spoke. It said they came seeking aid in a crisis that threatened all free civilizations in this galactic sector. The Void Collective had emerged from the outer territories. Dr. Carter, who was part of the Earth delegation, leaned forward and asked what exactly the outer territories were. Eldest colors shifted to dark blues and grays, which was the Viridian equivalent of fear. The outer territories were regions of space beyond the mapped galaxy, where the fabric of space-time itself was unstable. Civilizations that ventured there rarely returned, and those that did were changed fundamentally. The Void Collective was one such civilization, and they were once called the Tharnex. They had been a peaceful scientific society, but they disappeared into the outer territories 3,000 years ago. Now they had returned, and they were no longer peaceful at all. A holographic display activated, showing grainy images of alien vessels that seemed to hurt human eyes to look at directly. The ships were wrong somehow, and their geometries followed rules that should not exist in normal space. Eldest continued and explained that the Void Collective sought to expand their territory by consuming other civilizations. They did not conquer in the traditional sense. They converted biological life into something else entirely, something compatible with the altered physics they had adapted to over millennia. They had already absorbed 7 minor civilizations in the past 2 years. The Valorian Empire had lost 40 entire systems to them. That information got everyone's complete attention because the Valorians, who seemed so powerful when they attacked Earth, were now losing systems. Marcus asked directly what the Viridians wanted from humanity. Eldest replied simply that they wanted human weapons. They wanted quantum disruption technology and Prometheus devices. The Void Collective vessels were resistant to conventional weapons because their hulls existed partially in altered space-time dimensions. That made them extremely difficult to damage with traditional firepower. But human quantum weapons did not rely on conventional physics. They might be effective where Viridian weapons had failed completely. The room erupted in debate as representatives argued different positions. Some advocated for immediate assistance, citing humanity's obligation to peaceful species. Others pushed for isolation, pointing out that Earth had only been part of the galactic community for 2 years. They had no obligation to fight other people's wars. Commander Lisa Hayes, who was now Deputy Director of the Earth Defense Force, raised a practical concern. She asked Eldest with respect how Earth could help when they had fewer than 500 combat-ready spacecraft. They had perhaps 3,000 pilots trained for space combat. The Viridians were describing a threat that had destroyed entire civilizations. What could humanity realistically contribute to such a massive conflict? Eldest answered with one word, and that word was symbol. Earth defeated the Valorian Empire when humanity should have been conquered within hours. That victory had become legend across 100 worlds. Species that had spent centuries under Valorian domination now spoke of Earth as proof that military might could be challenged successfully. If humanity joined the coalition, then others would follow their example. But more practically, human weapons technology could provide the breakthrough they desperately needed. They had been fighting the Void Collective defensively, trying to contain them. They needed to strike back, and quantum disruption technology might make that possible. Dr. Carter asked the question on everyone's mind. If they shared their technology, what guarantee did they have that it would not be used against Earth later? Eldest admitted with startling honesty that there was none. They could not promise that every species in the coalition would forever remain peaceful toward humanity. They could only promise that right now they faced a common threat. If the Void Collective was not stopped, they would eventually reach Earth. Perhaps not for a century or perhaps longer, but they would come. Humanity could choose to fight now as part of a coalition or later completely alone. The debate continued for 3 days as Marcus consulted with military advisors and scientists and philosophers and representatives from every major nation. The arguments for and against involvement were compelling on both sides. Finally, the president addressed Marcus privately in a secure communication and asked for his recommendation. Marcus chose his words carefully and said he joined the military to protect Earth. For his entire career, that meant protecting against human threats. Then the Valorians showed that Earth's enemies might not be human.